Alright, so let's go through creating the F1 car from scratch. Now this is going to be fairly well sped up, but I'm assuming that you'll be able to work fairly closely with this. So essentially what we're doing here is inserting the block that we created before, just to give us a bit of a guide, and moving into the center of the plane just to make sure that we know exactly where it is. Now we're going to be measuring the distance from the bottom of the CO2 canister here to the deck, and it's 19.5 millimeters at this point. So we need to actually move it up a little bit, and that's because the minimum specification from the bottom of the CO2 canister to the track is 22 millimeters. So let's just move that up 3.5 millimeters, and that will keep that above the surface for us a little ways. And the sketch is in the wrong place, we'll just turn that off. We don't really need that turned on anyway. And there's our block. So now our block is in the middle, ready to go, and we want to try to create as many sketches as we can away from using the block surfaces. So we're just going to use it as a guide for the first little while. Let's create the spaces that we need to make sure that there's enough space between the wheels and the rest of the design, and we'll make sure that we create the virtual cargo as well. And the virtual cargo is going to help us just make sure there's enough of a gap between everything that we need to. Now ironically, later on in the piece here, just check those dimensions, I make a mistake and don't cover the cargo all the way, and you would need to fix that. I don't fix it in this particular instance, and that's because this is just an example, but of course I probably just have to make the side pods a little bit thicker, or widen the body of the car at that point, but that's neither of those a massive deal. I can always edit earlier sketches to make sure that I bring the side of the car out underneath those pods. So let's create some duplicates of this very quickly, create the wheels, and we're going to insert all of these components into the block in the correct places. Now the main thing here to do is make sure that the places you're going to place them obviously fit within the confines of the maximum lengths or minimum lengths of the vehicle. And the maximum length is 220 millimeters, 223, and the minimum is 170. So in this particular instance, what I end up doing is cutting the car down to 150 millimeters, placing all the blocks, and then using the other 20 millimeters at the front of the vehicle to put the nose cone in, so that the nose cone is placed in the correct place but also extends the front of the vehicle, which means that if it is too short, what we can do is just extend the nose of the vehicle slightly, and that will make sure that we sit within those specifications. So we'll measure off the front of the vehicle here and put those blocks in place. Right, so the blocks and cargo are in place, and we're pretty much ready to start building. You can see that little sketch I put down the bottom there to measure the size of the vehicle. You can also see that I've renamed on the left hand side in the tree there. I've renamed all the different components, and I've got those in place. So now I'm going to use a plane at the back of this, off the back of the vehicle, so that I can start sketching. And we're going to draw the back of the vehicle in place. Now one major thing here is to remember that we just draw one side. Okay, you don't need to draw both sides of the vehicle. You don't need to try to mirror anything right now. So use that P key on your keyboard to project the surfaces into the sketch that you need to make sure that you stick pretty close to, just the back of the block and the circle for the canister, CO2 canister, and then you can start drawing your lines. Now I normally use straight lines for the side of the vehicle at the back. Of course you can use curved, you can do whatever you like as long as it sits within the confines of the structural expectations of the vehicle and the size expectations that they have in the rules. There's lots of different shapes and things that you can do, trim out those edges, create a little shape like that. Make sure that you've got enough clearances between the inside of the CO2 canister and the outside of the body. I always leave at least 1 millimeter for finishing, knowing that our CNC machine can mill down pretty closely to exactly what we need. But of course just got to make sure, so trim out whatever components you don't need, and let's clear this sketch, and then we'll start sketching the front edge. Now the front edge of the vehicle here on the front face of the vehicle is going to be the part that interfaces with your nose cone, so that might be a slightly different shape, and of course we're going to be connecting the front and back with some rails so that we can use those rails to guide aloft. So again, use your P tool on your keyboard to project in the different elements of the back side of the design so that you can line everything up and get it in there correctly. By projecting those sketches in, you can make sure that you're exactly the same distance off the front and the back of the vehicle and get things exactly where you need them. So when you start your front plane, just make sure that you create an offset plane, push it all the way to the front of the vehicle there and line it up with what is the theoretical front edge. Of course, you could use a plane at angle if you wanted to, and run it off the front of that sketch. There's lots of ways that you can add that sketch plane to the correct place. Starting a new sketch, of course, turn off the block so it's not in the way, and then start a new sketch on that plane that you created. Alright, so having put the offset plane on the front edge of the car, I'm just going to project the rear sort of key points, I suppose, onto the front sketch, and that's the center of the circle at the back, so that I have a center point of reference, and then this edge, and then I'm going to draw onto this right hand side over here. So I'm going to draw what I perceive to be the front little edge of the car here, and then bring it up flat across the front so that I've got some narrow plane of reference for the front edge of the car, and making sure that I've got all the bits and pieces in place. I suppose at this point, it's easier to be very cautious as to what aspect I suppose you're going to provide to the front of the vehicle so that you can match up with the nose cone. So this is where designing that nose cone first can actually provide you with a little bit of a clearer perspective on what your front end is going to look like. So you can see my front end there dips in the middle and has the edges, and we're pretty much ready to go with the next section. So now we're going to put all the axes through these 2 points and create the various axes that I need to run the different planes. So when you're designing the sort of now body of the car, you're needing to put rails, and we did this in the front nose cone design. I think we did it in the rear wing design too. But essentially what you're doing is selecting the 2 points of reference and creating an axis between them. So the point of reference is obviously the back sketch that you've drawn, and then the front sketch that you've drawn, like that. And you can see I get that blue line. What that's basically giving me is an axis that I can draw a plane at angle on, and then I can draw various lines on that to create the rails that I need to put the car edges on. I'm creating some multiple planes along, or sort of multiple points along a path here, to give myself the points that I need to connect to the bottom edge of that rail at the front. So that'll just make it easier, and you don't really have to place these in any particular point. They don't have to be equidistant to the front. It's up to you how you sort of manage that. If you wanted to make them equidistant, you could just draw lines, and that would put points in place. But I'm basically just connecting the front and the back of the car together as much as I possibly can, and then I'm going to create all of the different planes at angle. So at this point now, obviously, like I said, creating the planes at angle and drawing the sketches on each plane. So create the plane at angle and then draw the sketch. It's easier to do it this way around rather than trying to draw all the sort of put the planes at angle on and then draw the sketch at the end on all different planes, because eventually you'll run out of sort of visual aspect of the car. So I'm going to project the beginning and end point of the sketch into, where the axis runs between the 2 points of the front and back sketch. I'm going to bring those points in, project those points into this sketch, and that's critical because it means then that the line that you draw from the front sketch to the back sketch actually touches those 2 profiles. If you don't project those 2 points on the front and rear sketch to the front and back of the car, what you're going to end up with is the line not touching the front line, the right profile. And then when you go to use those as rails, your Fusion will throw an error and tell you that the lines aren't touching both profiles. It has to touch both ends, so you do need to be very cautious that that's exactly what you've done. So I'm going to go through the process here of connecting all the different planes at angle to each different line, and then drawing the series of lines onto each one. And you can project each line separately into each axis plane, so that then you can draw the similar points and keep those lines the same. Alright, so I've done all of the planes at angle for the bottom half of the car, and now I'm going to draw the top half of the car. It is key to note, obviously, that I'm trying to draw around the different components that I'm using as placeholders. So you can see here that I've projected those points into the car, like I said before. I'm showing the block that I had brought into this sketch before, so that I have some point of reference to go around the canister, remembering that you have to have at least 3 millimeters clear of the canister from the car, so from the body of the car, the outside of the car. And that's important for obviously safety, but it's also an important aspect of the design requirements. So I've created that spline there to give myself that curvature that runs over the top of the car. It's a fairly basic curve. You can do things that are much more complex than this, multiple profiles and all kinds of things. There becomes complexities when you've got multiple bodies, but nonetheless, this is kind of the easiest way to go about that. And we're creating the next construction plane here on the back and the front, and just keep moving along as we go to draw each line. And now we're going to loft. So I've used the loft tool under the create menu to click the front profile and the back profile. So I start by the back profile and make sure I've selected all the different components I want to bring forward, and then I use the plus button to add the second profile at the front, do the same. Then I use the plus button to click each one of the rails and select each rail that it's going to follow. And those are all of the lines that you drew from the front and the back, front of the car to the back of the car along those axes, using those planes at angle. So now you can see that with the body here, I've created a bit of a basic curve. It's quite a sort of interesting little shape. It could be like I said, much more complex. You could draw all kinds of things into it. Knowing, of course, that you've only got a 6 millimeter drill bit that you can use to cut this out. So your curvature is going to be a minimum of 3 millimeters on the inside, and you won't be able to get away with that. So you do get some modifications, between what you can drill on the CNC and then what this creates, but there's not a lot in terms of scope to really do things out of the ordinary. You sort of need to keep pretty close to whatever you've drawn. So you can see that's why here what I'm doing is rounding off the edges, and that's to try to minimize any sharp angles that I know the CNC router can't get into when it cuts this thing side to side. And of course, even to that degree, we're relatively limited to the ways that you can cut this out. So we've got that body. I've rounded those edges now. I might do some more there just to make it tricky. And we're going to bring all those different components back in to see where everything sits and make sure it's all good. And now we're going to use the mirror tool under the create menu to mirror the body against itself. So you use the mirror plane, you select the body, which is the left hand body there that we created, and then you use the middle of the body as the plane. And using the combine tool, we're going to bring those together into one body. Alright, the next part of this is to add the side pods. So we're going to go through this a little bit at a time. I like to draw the side pods from the top, so I've drawn an axis along the rear of the car there, and now I'm going to add a plane at angle so that I can draw from the top down. That's because I wanted to put a sweeping sort of edge on this going towards the rear of the vehicle. If you wanted to sweep any other direction, you could easily do that. You can create planes at angle at any particular point near the back of the car here, and then add the side pods. Just make sure that you interface the face with one or the other. With the main body, because what we want to do with that later on is combine them into one piece. It'll make it a lot easier for us to sort of see how this all fits together. So I'm going to go back drawing this and just let you watch on for a little bit. Alright, we've got the side pod drawn, and now what I want to do is cut a bit of a curve on the back here. So I'm going to add a construction plane to the side of the pod, and I just want to draw a curve that's going to run down the back edge of the car, because I want the bottom edge of the car to be curved as it exits the rear of the vehicle. So the plan is to make sure that put a little circle on the side here and use the curvature of the circle to get a nice sort of clean edge. And of course, additionally to that, I'll stretch a spline down to the bottom edge of the car. So there may be some projections and so forth that need to be put in place to make sure that we get, exactly down to the edge and to the back side of the car. Once that's all in place, we can extrude through and cut the back corner off the car. Alright, so we've extruded the back edge and cut that off, and let's get started on the side pod. So this side pod here sits between the two wheels. There are requirements as to how big it can be, minimum sizes and so forth, and it needs to be flat so that you can add decals and so forth. It needs to have a flat face anyway. So I've added a plane to the side of the vehicle there along that flat face, and then I'm going to design and cut the edge. Now this is where I make the mistake and don't make it deep enough, because I should have moved the spacer, the virtual cargo, down further before I did this to make sure that the height was correct. So don't make the same mistake, but you'll understand the point when you get to building your version. Alright, we'll just extrude this out on this side. Now, if for some reason the entire body's not touching the car because you've got a wicked curve of some description and you've used a flat plane to draw on, that's absolutely fine. You can use the two-sided extrusion, and by extruding both sides and making sure that you add it as a new body, you can then draw this out. Okay, so from here what I'm going to do is just make it wide enough. I made a mistake there, and I'm going to add a construction plane and draw the sort of bottom edge of my vehicle, and then of the bottom edge of the side pod onto the front, and then I'm going to extrude that back into the side pod. So in this particular case I've drawn it out along the edge, and that's because I wanted a gap on the inside edge of my side pod, so that as the air funnels through the front of my car, it's going to compress in behind the backs of the wheels and in behind the back of the car and get forced in underneath the car, which, as according to Bernoulli's principle, allows us to accelerate the air underneath the car and create a bit of a low pressure system that will suck the air in and then force the air out the back of the vehicle. So of course it's all good in theory, but we'd have to look at the testing and look at the actual principles of how that's functioned when it runs. So you add this as a joined extrusion. That's so that you can join it to that top edge that's already been created, and then similarly to before, we're going to mirror this. So in this particular case we're going to use a mirror that runs along the center plane of the whole vehicle, like in terms of the whole 3D plane that we're working in, because we obviously lost that center reference plane when we mirrored the middle part of the car there, the main body of the car, and we mirrored that, so, and then joined it. So we're going to use the center plane of the whole 3D area to mirror that plane across the other side, and then we combine them into one part, so then we have all of those pieces together. Let's go on to designing the nose cone now. Now in this particular case I actually take the front of the vehicle there and add a construction plane, and then I project the sketch of the front of the vehicle onto that construction plane, and that's it. That's all I needed to do. The reason for doing that is because I actually need this as a separate part initially, and if I just drew directly onto the front of the car, it would join to the front of the car without providing me with a separate part. And the reason I needed to be a separate part is eventually what I do need to do is create a little socket that goes into the front of the car and a piece off the nose cone that I can 3D print, so that I can join these two things together later. So it needs to be a separate part for 3D printing, or if you decide to press it out of carbon fiber or something like that, that's up to you. So I'm going to go through the process here of curving all the edges and making everything match up. Create a little front blade on the front of it, and then I'm going to add the front nose cone wings over the front of the car. So I'll let you watch on. And look, at this point what I've done is I've created those two little drop down blades. Now those blades are there obviously to hold the wing that's going to be fixed near the track. Of course you could design anything that you wanted to design or lower the front of the vehicle. It's entirely up to you. This is just the way I put this together. So we'll extrude those down, and I just realized that this little front edge here needs a bit of rounding just so that it doesn't end up as a flat face for the air to slam into. It can actually curve around it. Probably should have thought through that problem a little bit better earlier on, but in any case it should work just fine the way that it is there. Probably would do something a little bit different. Now this is where things get a little bit tricky. In actual fact what I did here is created a axis along the front edge of the little blade, and then I've added a plane at angle. I'm then going to add an offset plane from that plane into the middle of the bladed area, like into the front nose cone area, because essentially what I wanted to do was bring obviously from the very, very middle of the car, the blade, the sort of front wing out to the edge of that blade that I've dropped down, and then I'm going to create another offset plane that's out near the edge of the wheel and bring that out to the edge of the wheel, and that's so that I can create 3 points or three profiles of reference that I can then use to loft in between. Now again, things could get much more complex where you could design all different rail designs and all different things to bring those different profiles out the front, and you could use those profiles multiple times to merge multiple parts and have multiple blades and so forth on the front wing. I didn't need to get too excited about any of those things. I just wanted to make it as simple as possible, knowing that this is still much more complex than just creating a single straight blade that extrudes from one edge to the other edge. So it's up to you how crazy you get. Again, I use the center reference point as the mirror point to mirror the blade, or mirror the front wing underneath those blades after I do the loft. So I'll let you watch on through this part. And now by creating a sketch on the end of the wing here, I can do the wing tip, and then once the wing tip's complete, we'll be able to mirror it. And I do a little bit of shaping around the edges here just to make the edges a little bit more curved and aesthetically pleasing. So yeah, check it out. Alright, so I've mirrored that front wing part, and that's looking pretty good. Pretty happy with the outcome for that, and I'll be able to 3D print all those different parts and get that all ready to check out in the wind tunnel and other things. Let's get on to the back of the vehicle here. Now again, we're going to project this into the sketch, cut out the back of the car here, and make the little strap that's going to go around the outside. I suppose the benefit here, like I said before in another video, is that if I create the back wing here and add that strap to the back of the vehicle, it just means that I can easily interchange rear wings. So if I wanted to, I could create multiple profiles on that back wing, and add them ad hoc if I wanted to, as we go about the process of building the car. So even in testing, then I can test multiple rear wings. It's like having multiple front wings. Once you design one, you can design 15 if you want, and be testing them and seeing which one has the greatest effect. My suggestion at this particular point, as you can see that I made that bit of a mistake there, was to have a bit of the car exposed. So I actually decided to take that rear little strap part there and extrude it out. So now I have the strap that I can use to mount the wings from, and the wingtips and so forth. And then I'm going to just make this circle a little bit bigger around the outside and cut the back of the car out. You will need to do some finishing, and it's also critical to note here that when I designed at the very beginning of designing the car, I left 4mm of space around the outside of the CO2 canister, so that gives me enough room there to allow this to recess by 1mm into the back of the car. If you wanted to have 2mm, 3mm, 4mm, of course you would have to make the rear of the car a lot thicker to take up that space. Just be very aware of that before you go leaving exactly 3mm. I suppose there's two problems with leaving 3mm around the CO2 canister at the beginning of the design, and that is that then basically you'll find it very challenging to sand the rear of the vehicle and get it looking perfect, because you won't have any variance if things go wrong, and if you're under 3mm it can be a disqualification. So just be cautious of that. But I'll let you watch as I go through the design of the rear wing. Alright, so we've designed the rear wing. We've just done a really basic extrusion on this one. Again, you could get all crazy and do all weird things. What I've done here is split the body, so I'm going to choose the body to split as the wing, and then I'm going to use the face of the inside of the strap to split that wing, and that means I can cut away that section and that the angle is correct for when I then put that onto the back of the car. It's not going to impact on the rear of the vehicle in any way. It just makes it a little bit easier to make sure that it slides onto the back of the car properly. And we'll go about the process of mirroring that rear wing down the center plane of the design, just make that a little bit easier. And then I can combine the strap and the two wing sides together into one component, into one body. Not component, into a body, and then we're ready to place it onto the back of the vehicle or export it for 3D printing. Now once I've done all of my exports for 3D printing and made sure that all my parts are ready to go, the last step really to get it ready for rendering is potentially to join them. Now you don't have to join all the parts together. I remove all the external parts and then make some little rods to go through the wheels and join it into the body and so forth, which would be the best way to work it out for computational fluid dynamics. And look, that's just done. That's the whole car built. So I hope you had some fun with this. I know it's a bit of a challenge, but hopefully it will give you some place to go. Good luck.